Picture this, a woman, 9 months pregnant, screaming in a hospital delivery room, 6 bikers in leather standing guard at the door, police sirens wailing outside, and her husband handcuffed 3 floors below, bloody and desperate, screaming that's his baby. This is how Claire Donovan's story ended. But how did a forensic accountant, a cheating lawyer, and a motorcycle club president end up in a war that would destroy lives, break the legal system, and prove that sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, it comes from family you choose, not the one you marry? What happened in that hotel parking lot changed everything. And before this story ends, you'll understand why sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. If stories about real survival, brutal truth, and hard-won victories speak to you, hit that like button. Drop a comment telling me if you'd have fought back or walked away. And subscribe, because next week's story will make this one look tame. Now, let's go back to where it all started. The delivery room smelled like antiseptic and fear. Claire Donovan screamed through another contraction, her hands white-knuckled on the bed rails. 8:43 at night. The baby was coming, whether she was ready or not. "You're doing great, Claire," the nurse said, checking monitors. "Almost there." But Claire wasn't focused on the birth. She was staring at the door, where her brother Reese stood with 6 other men. All of them wore leather vests with Iron Ravens patches. All of them looked ready for war. Outside in the hallway, police sirens wailed. Security was trying to keep someone out. Claire knew who. "That's my wife," Blake's voice echoed from somewhere beyond the door. "That's my baby. You can't keep me out." Another contraction hit. Claire bore down, pushed with everything she had. The baby was coming. Her daughter was coming. And Blake Hartley was in handcuffs 3 floors below, screaming about his rights. Reese caught her eye. Her big brother, the man who raised her, the president of a motorcycle club who looked like he'd kill for her without hesitation. "He's not getting near you," Reese said quietly. "Focus on her. Focus on Paige." Claire pushed again. The doctor said something about crowning. The room blurred. Pain, pressure, then a cry, sharp and angry and alive. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, placing a tiny, squirming body on Claire's chest. Claire looked down at her daughter. Dark hair, blue eyes, perfect fingers, named after their mother, Paige Donovan. Not Hartley, never Hartley. "This is how it ended," Claire whispered, tears streaming. "But to understand why, you need to know where it started." Flashback 3 months earlier. The house in Scottsdale was exactly what Blake wanted. 4 bedrooms, mountain views, a pool that cost more than most people's cars. Claire stood in the nursery doorway, 8 months pregnant, rubbing her swollen belly. The room was nearly perfect. Soft yellow walls, white crib with handmade bedding, rocking chair in the corner. She'd spent weeks getting every detail right. "How's my favorite accountant?" Blake's voice came from behind her. Claire turned. Her husband stood there in his work clothes, tie loosened, briefcase in hand, 34 years old and already a partner at Morrison and Associates, the golden boy of commercial real estate law. "Tired," Claire admitted. "Your daughter's been using my ribs as a punching bag." Blake smiled, kissed her forehead. "Only 2 more weeks." But he didn't meet her eyes. He'd been doing that lately, not meeting her eyes, always checking his phone. Coming home late with excuses about depositions and client meetings. Claire was a forensic accountant. She made a living finding patterns, spotting irregularities, following money trails. And something about Blake's behavior was setting off every alarm bell in her professional brain. "How was work?" she asked, watching his face. "Busy. The usual." He was already walking away, heading to their bedroom. "I need to shower, make some calls." Claire followed slowly, her hand on her belly. The baby kicked again, like she was trying to tell her something. That night, while Blake slept, Claire did something she'd never done before. She went through his phone. It was password protected, but she knew Blake. He wasn't creative. She tried their anniversary. No. His birthday. No. Then, on instinct, she tried the date they found out she was pregnant. The phone unlocked. Claire's hands shook as she scrolled through messages. Nothing obvious. Blake was smarter than that. But there were deleted conversations, cleared call logs, browser history wiped clean. A forensic accountant knew how to dig deeper. She plugged the phone into her laptop, ran a recovery program. 30 minutes later, she had everything. Hotel charges, five-star restaurants, jewelry purchases from Tiffany, flowers delivered to addresses she didn't recognize, all dating back 8 months, the entire pregnancy. Claire sat in the dark nursery, staring at receipts on her laptop screen. Her perfect husband, her perfect life, all of it built on lies. She thought about confronting him, demanding answers. But she needed more than suspicions. She needed proof. The next morning, Claire told Blake she had a doctor's appointment. Instead, she drove to his office, waited in the parking garage. She'd installed a tracking app on his phone while recovering the data. Now she watched the little blue dot move across her screen. Blake left work at noon, but he didn't go to the courthouse. He didn't go to a client meeting. He drove straight to the Canyon Ridge Hotel. Claire followed. The Canyon Ridge Hotel sat on the edge of Scottsdale, expensive and discreet, the kind of place where rich people conducted business they didn't want noticed. Claire parked 3 rows away from Blake's Mercedes, her heart pounding so hard she thought the baby could feel it. She was 8 months pregnant. Her ankles were swollen. She had to pee every 20 minutes, and she was about to catch her husband cheating. Claire checked the tracking app again. Blake's phone hadn't moved. He was inside. She could leave, drive away, pretend she didn't know, raise their daughter in blissful ignorance. But that wasn't who Claire Donovan was. She'd never been the kind of woman who looked away from hard truths. Her mother had taught her that before the drugs took her. Claire got out of the car. The hotel lobby was all marble and soft lighting. Expensive carpet muffled her footsteps. The elevator ride to the 4th floor felt like descending into cold water. Room 418? Blake's phone showed he was in room 418. Claire stood in the hallway, hand on her belly. The baby kicked once. Hard. Like she was saying, "You can do this, Mama." She knocked. Footsteps inside. The door opened. Blake stood there, shirt untucked, surprised and guilty all at once. "Claire, don't!" She looked past him into the room. A woman sat on the bed, young, mid-20s, blonde hair, expensive dress, someone Claire recognized. "Amber," Claire's voice cracked. "You're his paralegal." Amber Sinclair stood up slowly, no shame in her expression, just annoyance, like Claire was interrupting something important. "He was going to tell you," Amber said. "After the baby." Blake stepped forward. "This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" Claire's voice stayed steady. Years of testifying in court had taught her control. "Because it looks like you've been screwing your 26-year-old paralegal while your pregnant wife decorates the nursery." "Don't be dramatic," Blake said. And there it was, the shift, from guilty to defensive. "You're always so emotional these days. It's the pregnancy hormones." Amber laughed. Actually laughed. "We've been together 8 months. Claire, the whole pregnancy. He was going to leave you after the baby came. He just felt guilty." The words hit like physical blows. 8 months. The entire time. Every doctor's appointment. Every midnight craving. Every moment she'd thought they were building something together. All lies. "Claire, wait." Blake reached for her arm. She yanked away. "Don't touch me." She turned and walked. Not ran. Walked, slowly and carefully, one hand on her belly, protecting the only innocent person in this nightmare. Blake called after her. She didn't stop. In the elevator, Claire pressed both hands to her stomach. The baby moved beneath her palms. Strong. Alive. Depending on her. "We're okay, Claire." Claire whispered, "We're going to be okay." But she didn't believe it yet. Claire drove on autopilot. Not home. She couldn't go home. Not to that perfect house filled with perfect lies. There was only one place she could go. Only one person who would know what to do. The Iron Ravens clubhouse sat on the outskirts of Phoenix, a large building with motorcycles lined up outside, chrome gleaming under security lights, men in leather standing near the entrance. Claire pulled into the parking lot. The bikers noticed immediately. A pregnant woman alone wasn't their usual visitor. One of them approached. Big, tattooed, intimidating. "Can I help you?" I need Reese Donovan, Claire said. Her voice shook. I'm his sister. The man's face softened instantly. I'm Dutch. Come on. He led her inside. The clubhouse smelled like motor oil and coffee, pool tables, worn leather couches, motorcycle parts scattered on tables. This was Reese's world, a world Blake had always looked down on. Wait here, Dutch said, disappearing down a hallway. Claire stood in the main room. Several bikers glanced at her, then away, giving her space, respecting her obvious distress. A door opened. Reese emerged, 6'3", dark hair, dark eyes that matched hers. 38 years old, but he'd looked 40 since he was 25. That's what raising a teenage sister alone did to a man. His face went from curious to concerned in seconds. Claire, she opened her mouth to speak. Nothing came out. The tears she'd held back in the hotel hallway came now. All at once, Reese crossed the room in 3 strides, caught her as her knees buckled. I've got you. His office was small, desk, chairs, walls covered with motorcycle rally posters. He sat her down gently, disappeared, came back with water. Tell me everything? So she did. The suspicious behavior, the recovered data, the hotel, Amber's cruel words, all of it. Reese listened without interrupting. His jaw clenched tighter with every sentence. His hands formed fists. Claire saw the old Reese, the one who'd spent time in juvenile detention for fighting, the one who'd built this club from nothing, the one who solved problems with violence before he learned better ways. I'll kill him, Reese said quietly, dangerously. No, Claire grabbed his arm. That's not why I came here. I need help, but not that kind. What kind then? The smart kind. Claire wiped her eyes. I'm a forensic accountant. Reese, I know how to follow money, find hidden assets, build evidence. But I need protection. I need someone Blake won't steamroll. Reese pulled out his phone, made a call. Jolene, it's Reese. I need you. 20 minutes later, a woman entered the office. Mid-30s, sharp suit, sharper eyes. Jolene Price, attorney. And based on the way Reese looked at her, something more. Claire, Jolene said, shaking hands. I've heard about you. Reese talks about his brilliant little sister constantly. Ex-girlfriend, Claire guessed. Current complicated situation, Jolene corrected with a slight smile. But right now, I'm your lawyer. Tell me everything. And I mean everything. 1 week later, Claire sat in her car outside Blake's office building. She'd moved out of their perfect house, moved into a small apartment Reese helped her rent. She'd blocked Blake's number. She was building a case. And she was about to drop the hammer. Jolene had filed divorce papers that morning. Restraining order, demand for full custody, forensic audit of all marital assets. Blake was being served right now, in his glass office, in front of his colleagues. Claire wished she could see his face. Her phone buzzed. Jolene, it's done. He's served. You should have seen him. Claire, white as a sheet. Good, Claire said, and meant it. But this was just the beginning. Claire spent the next 3 days doing what she did best, following the money. She accessed Blake's credit cards, bank statements, transaction histories. As his wife, she still had legal access to joint accounts. And what she found made her forensic accountant's brain light up like Christmas. Blake wasn't just cheating, he was stealing. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there, moved from client trust accounts into personal accounts. Then larger sums, 50,000, 75,000, all carefully disguised as legitimate fees and expenses. Claire built a spreadsheet, documented every transaction, cross-referenced dates with case files. The pattern was clear. Blake Hartley had been embezzling from his law firm for at least 2 years, probably longer. She called Jolene. I found something big. They met at Jolene's office that night. Claire brought her laptop, her files, her evidence. Jolene's eyes widened as she reviewed the data. This is embezzlement, Jolene said. Serious embezzlement. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. 437,000, Claire said. Give or take? This changes everything. Jolene leaned back in her chair. We're not just talking divorce anymore. We're talking criminal charges. Will it help with custody? Claire asked. Her hand went to her belly automatically. The baby kicked. Strong, healthy, due in 3 weeks. Absolutely. A judge isn't going to grant custody to a man facing felony charges. Jolene smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Blake Hartley is about to learn a very expensive lesson. The restraining order hearing was the next morning. Claire sat beside Jolene in the courtroom, feeling exposed and vulnerable. 8.5 months pregnant, swollen ankles, maternity dress. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman about to give birth, fighting for her child. Blake sat across the aisle with his lawyer. Expensive suit, confident expression. But when he looked at Claire, something flickered in his eyes. Regret, fear. She couldn't tell. The judge reviewed the petition. 50-something woman with reading glasses and no tolerance for nonsense. Mr. Hartley, the judge said, you've been served with a restraining order petition. Do you wish to contest? Blake's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client maintains this is an overreaction to a marital dispute. A marital dispute, Jolene interrupted. Standing. Your Honor, Hartley engaged in an extramarital affair during his wife's entire pregnancy. Mrs. Donovan discovered the affair 8 days ago. She's 8.5 months pregnant. She needs protection during this vulnerable time. The judge looked at Blake. Is the affair true? Mr. Hartley. Blake hesitated. His lawyer whispered something. Blake nodded slowly. Yes, Your Honor. But there's no but that justifies this during your wife's pregnancy. The judge signed papers. Restraining order granted. Mr. Hartley, you're to maintain a distance of 500 feet from Mrs. Donovan at all times. Violation will result in immediate arrest. Claire felt something release in her chest. She was safe, legally protected. The system was working. Blake's face went red. He stood abruptly, ignoring his lawyer's hand on his arm. This is ridiculous. That's my baby she's carrying. That you chose to betray during the entire pregnancy. The judge snapped. Sit down, Mr. Hartley, or I'll hold you in contempt. Blake sat, but the look he gave Claire was pure hatred. Outside the courtroom, Jolene squeezed Claire's shoulder. You did great. How do you feel? Powerful, Claire admitted. For the first time in weeks, I feel like I'm winning. She should have known better. That afternoon, Claire returned to the apartment. She was exhausted, her back aching, ready to collapse. She just wanted to rest, to feel her baby kick, to believe for a moment that everything would be okay. Someone was waiting in the parking lot. An older woman stepped out of a black Mercedes, 60-something, expensive clothes, hair perfect, face hard. Claire recognized her. Harper Hartley, Blake's mother, old money, old Phoenix family, old power. Mrs. Donovan, Harper said. Not Claire, not dear. Mrs. Donovan, cold, formal. You need to leave, Claire said. The restraining order is against my son, not me. Harper moved closer. We need to talk. We have nothing to discuss. $2 million says otherwise. Claire froze. What? Harper pulled an envelope from her purse. $2 million, cash settlement. You take the money, drop the divorce proceedings, sign away all custody rights, and disappear. Go back to wherever Reese dug you up from. The words hit like slaps. Claire's hands shook. You want me to abandon my daughter for money? I want you to be realistic. Harper's voice stayed pleasant, reasonable, like she was discussing a business transaction. Blake made a mistake. He's sorry. But you're not the right kind of woman for our family. You never were. Some little nobody from a trailer park with a criminal brother. Get away from me. You have no idea who you're fighting. Harper continued. We have money, lawyers, connections, judges. Blake will get full custody, and you'll have nothing, and take the deal. Claire, it's the best you'll get. Harper dropped the envelope on the ground and walked away. Claire stood there, shaking. Her baby kicked frantically. Sensing her mother's distress, she picked up the envelope. Inside was a check, $2 million, made out to Claire Donovan. All she had to do was give up her daughter. Claire tore the check in half, then in quarters, then kept tearing until it was confetti in her hands. That night, around 3 in the morning, Claire woke to the sound of breaking glass. She rolled out of bed as quickly as an 8.5-month pregnant woman could, grabbed her phone, dialed 911. "Someone's vandalizing my car," she told the dispatcher, looking out the window at the parking lot below. A figure in dark clothes was smashing her windshield with a baseball bat. Systematic, methodical, tires slashed, windows shattered, the alarm screaming into the night. Police arrived within minutes, but by then, the figure was gone. Claire stood in the parking lot in her bathrobe, shaking. The police took statements, took photos, asked if she had enemies. "Check the security cameras," Claire said, pointing to the building's surveillance system. They did. The footage showed everything. The figure approached Claire's car at 2:47 a.m., face clearly visible, blonde hair, Amber Sinclair. "We'll bring her in for questioning," the officer said, but Claire knew better. She'd seen this before in cases she'd worked. Amber would have an alibi. Blake's money would buy witnesses. The system would fail. She was right. 3 days later, the police called. "Ms. Sinclair has multiple witnesses placing her at a bar 20 miles away at the time of the vandalism. We don't have enough evidence to charge her." "But she's on camera," Claire protested. "The footage quality isn't clear enough for positive identification." "I'm sorry, Mrs. Donovan. Without more evidence, our hands are tied." Claire hung up, sat in her empty apartment, felt the baby kick. Blake was fighting back, and he was using his money, his connections, his power to make the law irrelevant. Jolene came over that evening with takeout and bad news. "Blake filed a countersuit," Jolene said, spreading papers on Claire's coffee table. "He's claiming you're mentally unstable, that you've turned vindictive and paranoid. He's got a psychiatrist willing to testify that pregnancy hormones have made you irrational." "That's insane," Claire said. "It's strategy." Jolene's face was grim. "He's building a case that you're unfit. If he can paint you as unstable, hormonal, vindictive, he might convince a judge to grant him custody. Based on lies, based on perception. Claire, I need you to understand something." Jolene leaned forward. "Blake has resources. His mother has resources. They're going to fight dirty, dirtier than we thought." Claire looked down at her belly. Her daughter moved beneath her hands, strong, trusting, depending on her. "What do? We fight back, with facts, with evidence, with the truth." Jolene paused. "And we prepare for this to get worse before it gets better." Worse came faster than either of them expected. 5 days later, Claire returned to her office at Davidson Financial. She'd been on modified leave, working from home, but she needed to collect evidence files for the divorce case, physical documents that couldn't be accessed remotely. She waddled through the parking garage, her back aching, her feet swollen. 9 months pregnant now. The baby could come any day. The elevator doors opened. Claire stepped out on the 3rd floor and froze. Amber Sinclair stood at the reception desk, talking to Claire's boss, laughing, comfortable, like she belonged there. Claire's boss, Richard Davidson, saw her. His face went carefully neutral. "Claire, good to see you." "What's she doing here?" Claire asked, staring at Amber. "Ms. Sinclair just started in our accounting department," Richard said. "She comes highly recommended." "By who?" But Claire already knew. Blake, Blake's connections, Blake's money. Amber smiled, sweet, innocent. "Hi, Claire. I hope this won't be awkward. I'm really excited to work here." Claire's hands clenched. "Richard, can I speak with you privately?" In Richard's office, Claire explained everything. The affair, the vandalism, the harassment. Richard listened, his face carefully blank. "I'm sorry for what you're going through," Richard said finally, "but I can't fire someone based on their personal life. Miss Sinclair has excellent credentials. Unless she does something inappropriate at work, she's here because Blake put her here." Claire interrupted. "To harass me, to make me quit. That's speculation." Richard's voice cooled. "I suggest you focus on your work and avoid personal conflicts in the office. You're on leave anyway. By the time you return, I'm sure any awkwardness will have passed." Claire left his office, hands shaking. She collected her files, avoided eye contact with Amber, went to the parking garage. Amber followed her. Claire, wait! Amber's voice echoed in the concrete structure. Claire kept walking. Her car was in sight. Just 30 more feet. He never loved you, you know. Amber's voice turned cruel. You were the safe choice, the respectable wife for a lawyer climbing the social ladder. I'm what he actually wants. Claire reached her car, fumbled with keys. Amber grabbed her arm, spun her around. Look at me when I'm talking to you. Let go of me. Claire tried to pull away. Amber shoved her, hard. Claire stumbled backward. Her back hit the car. Her feet slipped. She fell, hitting the concrete on her side, her hands instinctively protecting her belly. Pain, sharp and immediate. Claire gasped. Couldn't breathe. Couldn't think beyond the pain radiating from her abdomen. Amber's eyes widened. Oh God, I didn't mean. Help, Claire whispered. Help me. Someone screamed for an ambulance. Security came running. Claire lay on the cold concrete, hands on her belly, feeling wetness between her legs. Blood. She was bleeding. The last thing she saw before the world went gray was Amber backing away, face pale, hands shaking, then darkness. Claire woke to beeping monitors and white walls, a hospital room, an IV in her arm, and her brother Reese sitting in a chair beside her bed, his face carved from stone. The baby. Claire's voice cracked. She's okay. Reese leaned forward, took her hand. You are both okay. They stopped the labor. But Claire, you're on strict bed rest now. Doctor said any more stress could send you into premature labor. Claire closed her eyes. Relief flooded through her. The baby was okay. Paige was okay. Then anger. Pure, white-hot anger. Amber pushed me, Claire said. She assaulted me. That's attempted murder. She tried to kill my baby. I know. Reese's voice was deadly calm. Dutch got the security footage. We have everything. Jolene arrived an hour later with a police officer. Claire gave her statement. Detailed. Clear. The officer took notes, his face sympathetic. We'll arrest Miss Sinclair immediately, he said. Assault on a pregnant woman is serious. You have video evidence. This is a slam dunk. Claire let herself believe it. Finally, the system was working. Amber would be arrested. Blake would be exposed. Justice would happen. She should have known better. The emergency hearing happened 3 days later. Claire attended remotely via video link, still on bed rest at Reese's clubhouse. Jolene represented her. The prosecutor presented evidence, security footage showing Amber shoving Claire, medical records confirming the fall and bleeding, witness statements. The judge reviewed everything, then looked at Amber's lawyer. Your Honor, the defense attorney said smoothly. Ms. Sinclair was clearly defending herself from harassment. Mrs. Donovan has been stalking my client for weeks, showing up at her workplace, making threats. That's a liar, Claire shouted at the screen. The judge held up a hand. Mrs. Donovan, please. Your Honor, Jolene interjected. There's no evidence of stalking. The security footage clearly shows. I've reviewed the footage, the judge interrupted. It's ambiguous. Could be interpreted as mutual confrontation, without clearer evidence of intent. She's 8 months pregnant. Jolene's voice rose. She fell. She bled. She almost went into premature labor. That's not ambiguous. But the judge was already shaking his head. An older man, expensive suit, country club tan. Claire recognized him from the photos in Blake's mother's house. Harper's golf buddy. Charges dismissed, the judge said. Insufficient evidence of criminal intent. The screen went dark. Claire sat in shock. Jolene called immediately, her voice shaking with rage. That judge is dirty, Jolene said. Harper bought him. I'll file an appeal, file complaints. But Claire, this is going to take time. Months. Maybe. And you're due in 2 weeks. What about custody? Claire asked. Her voice sounded hollow. Dead. Jolene was silent for a long moment. Blake's filed for temporary custody once the baby's born. Given the judge will likely get, given Harper's connections, I think there's a real chance he'll win. The words hung in the air. Blake might get custody. After everything. After the affair. The lease. The embezzlement, the harassment, he might take her baby. Claire ended the call, sat in the small room Reese had set up for her at the clubhouse, stared at the wall. She'd done everything right, used the law, played by the rules, built evidence, trusted the system, and she was losing anyway. That night, Reese found her crying in the nursery they'd assembled. A simple room, secondhand crib, donated clothes, nothing like the perfect nursery in the house she'd shared with Blake. "I can't win," Claire whispered. "He has too much money, too much power. The judges are bought. The system is rigged." Reese sat beside her. "Then we stop playing by the system's rules." "What does that mean?" "It means I handle this my way." His voice was hard, dangerous. The old Reese. The Iron Raven's way. "No," Claire grabbed his arm. "I won't let you go to prison for me." "I'm not going to prison." Reese looked at her. "But Blake Hartley is going to learn what happens when you hurt a Donovan." "Reese, he hurt my sister. He endangered my niece. That doesn't stand." Reese stood. "You did it your way, Claire, legal way, smart way, and they corrupted it. Now we do it my way." He left. Claire sat alone, one hand on her belly. The baby kicked, strong, healthy, due any day now. Claire thought about her options. Take Harper's money and run. Let Blake win. Disappear with her daughter and spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Or fight back. Really fight back. Use every weapon at her disposal, even the ones that scared her. The next morning, Claire called Reese. "I need you to do something. Anything. I need you to make Blake understand he can't win this." Claire's voice was steady, cold. "I need him scared. Not hurt. Not dead. Just convinced that backing down is his only option." Silence on the line. Then, "You sure?" "I'm sure. This crosses a line, Claire. Can't uncross it." "He crossed the line first." Claire looked at her reflection in the window. Pregnant, vulnerable, done with being a victim. "Do what you have to do. Just make sure there's no evidence." 3 nights later, Blake Hartley worked late at his office. His law firm occupied the 8th floor of a high-rise downtown. Glass walls, expensive view. The kind of place where rich people solved rich people problems. Blake was in trouble. Real trouble. The embezzlement investigation was moving forward despite his best efforts to bury it. Claire had found too much evidence, built too solid a case. His firm was cooperating with prosecutors to avoid liability. His partnership was hanging by a thread. Worse, Harper had stopped answering his calls. His own mother, the woman who'd promised to fix everything, had gone silent. Blake suspected she was cutting her losses, protecting the family name by distancing herself from him. He needed to convince Claire to drop everything, take a settlement, disappear. It was his only play. Blake gathered his files, turned off his office lights, headed for the parking garage. The building was empty. Security had made their rounds. He was alone, or so he thought. The elevator opened on P2. Blake stepped out into concrete and shadows. His Mercedes waited in its designated spot, gleaming under fluorescent lights. He'd bought it to impress clients, to project success. Now it felt like a monument to everything falling apart. He didn't notice the motorcycles parked in the corners, didn't see the men leaning against pillars, didn't realize he'd walked into a trap until it was too late. Not until they moved. 6 men in leather vests stepped into the light. Big men, dangerous men. They surrounded Blake's car in a choreographed movement that spoke of military precision or years of working together. Blake's heart hammered against his ribs. His hand fumbled for his phone. Before he could reach it, another biker was suddenly there. Hand on Blake's wrist, gentle pressure, firm grip, a warning without words. "You're Blake Hartley." Not a question, a statement, cold, clinical. One man stepped forward from the group, tall, dark-haired, dark-eyed. Blake recognized him from courthouse photos Claire's lawyer had submitted. Reese Donovan, Claire's brother, the biker gang president. Up close, Reese was more intimidating than any photograph could capture. 6'3" of controlled violence, tattoos crawling up both arms. Face that had seen hard living, but it was his eyes that terrified Blake. They were Claire's eyes. Same blue-green shade, same intensity, but where Claire's held hurt and betrayal, Reese's held calculation and consequence. This is assault, Blake said, hating how his voice shook, hating that these men could smell his fear. I'll call the police. No, you won't. Reese moved closer, not touching, just close enough that Blake could smell leather and motor oil and something that smelled like inevitable consequence. Because if you call the police, I'll tell them about the embezzlement, the 3 other women you've been sleeping with besides Amber, the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the client funds you've been using to maintain your lifestyle. Want me to keep going? Blake's mouth went dry. How did they know about the others? About the accounts. Reese smiled. It wasn't pleasant. My sister's a forensic accountant, real smart, smarter than you ever gave her credit for. She found everything, every ASOM, every transaction, every lie, every woman, and she's the only reason I'm talking right now instead of acting. So you're going to listen real careful. The other bikers moved closer, not threatening overtly, just there, present, a reminder of numbers and capability and what could happen if Reese stopped being reasonable. Blake's back pressed against the Mercedes. He was trapped, physically and metaphorically. That woman you betrayed, Reese continued, his voice staying quiet, level. Somehow that made it more terrifying than shouting. That's someone's daughter, someone's sister. She's carrying your baby, 9 months pregnant, and you treated her like she was disposable, like she didn't matter. That doesn't sit right with me. Well, I'll give her anything she wants, Blake said quickly, words tumbling over each other. Money, the house, everything, full custody, whatever. Just call them off. It's not about money. Reese leaned against the Mercedes, casual, like they were discussing the weather. It's about understanding. You need to understand that hurting Claire has consequences, that your mother's money doesn't buy you immunity from everything, that there are people who love her who don't play by country club rules or respect bought judges. Blake nodded frantically. Sweat ran down his spine. What do you want? What do I have to do? I want you to agree to a fair settlement, joint custody after you serve your time, child support based on your actual income, not the shell game you've been playing, fair division of assets, none of this custody battle bullshit, none of these legal games your mother's been orchestrating. Reese's eyes went cold, flat. You're going to be a good father from a distance. Support your daughter financially, and stay the hell away from Claire, or you're going to be a cautionary tale. Your choice? Okay, yes. Whatever she wants, I'll sign anything. Blake would have agreed to anything in that moment, would have promised anything to make these men go away. Good. Reese pushed off the car. The other bikers backed away in unison. Silent, smooth, like choreographed intimidation. One more thing. If you ever make her cry again, we'll have another conversation. But next time, it won't be in a parking garage. It won't be polite. It won't be a warning. And your mother's golf buddy judges won't be able to help you. We clear. Clear, Blake whispered. The bikers backed away. Mounted motorcycles. Engines roared to life, echoing through the concrete structure. Reese paused at the garage exit, looked back at Blake. She deserved better than you. Remember that every time you think about fighting for custody, you don't actually want. Every time you think about using your daughter as a weapon, she deserved better. And now she'll get it. Then they were gone. Blake sat in his Mercedes for 20 minutes, shaking. Eventually, he drove home, called his lawyer from the car, told him to draw up settlement papers. Everything Claire wanted. No fight, no custody battle, complete capitulation. His lawyer asked why the sudden change. Blake said he'd had a moment of clarity, a realization that dragging this out would only hurt his daughter. The lawyer didn't believe him, but lawyers didn't have to believe. They just had to execute. But Amber Sinclair was watching Blake's house that night. She'd been watching for days, worried about him, still holding on to some fantasy that they had a future together. She saw him come home shaken, saw him pacing by the windows, making frantic calls. She knew something had happened, something that had scared Blake badly enough to break. The next morning, Amber went to the police, claimed Reese Donovan and his motorcycle gang had threatened to kill Blake, provided a detailed statement about Blake's fear, his sudden capitulation. Everything. She framed it as witness to a crime, as civic duty, as protecting someone she cared about. She didn't realize she was destroying Claire's last line of defense. An arrest warrant was issued within hours. Reese turned himself in voluntarily that afternoon, walked into the police station with his lawyer, maintained his innocence, said he'd been nowhere near Blake's office, had alibis, witnesses, but it didn't matter. The charge was filed. Bail would take time to process. Reese made one phone call from the station. To Claire. "I'm sorry it was all," he said, his voice steady despite everything. "Amber saw me leave Blake's building. She's pressing charges, claiming I threatened to kill him. They're gonna hold me for at least 72 hours, maybe longer." Claire sat in the clubhouse, 9 months and 3 days pregnant, and felt the last piece of her safety crumble. To protect her, Reese had crossed a line. Now he was in jail, and Claire was alone. That night at 11:47, the contractions started. The contractions woke Claire at 2 a.m., regular, strong, unmistakable. No false alarm this time. This was real labor. The baby was coming. Claire lay in bed for the first 3 contractions, timing them on her phone, 4 minutes apart, 60 seconds long, textbook early labor. She should have hours still, time to get to the hospital, time to prepare. But by the 4th contraction, they were 3 minutes apart. By the 5th, 2.5, her body had its own timeline, and it was moving fast. Dutch drove her to the hospital, 6 other Iron Ravens following on motorcycles. They'd been taking shifts watching the clubhouse, making sure Claire was never alone. Now they escorted her like a presidential convoy, engines roaring through empty Phoenix streets at 3 in the morning. Reese called from jail, desperate. Claire could hear other inmates shouting in the background, cell doors clanging, the chaos of county lockup. "I'll be there," he promised, voice breaking. "My lawyer's processing bail right now. Emergency motion. I'll be there, Claire. I swear." "Just focus on getting out," Claire said through a contraction. She gripped the phone so hard her knuckles went white. "The baby and I will be fine." But she didn't believe it. She needed her brother, needed his steady presence, needed to know someone was protecting her from Blake, from Harper, from whatever might come next. The contractions were coming faster. Every 3 minutes, every 2 minutes, Claire was admitted immediately, taken to labor and delivery. Nurses moved efficiently, asking questions, checking vitals, monitoring the baby's heartbeat. "You're at 5 centimeters, the nurse said after checking. Moving fast for a first baby, doctors on her way. Jolene arrived within 30 minutes, briefcase in hand even at 3 a.m. She looked like she'd been awake for hours, probably had been, working on Reese's bail motion. "I just got interesting news," Jolene said, pulling a chair close to Claire's bed. "You need to hear this before active labor hits, and you can't focus on anything else." "Kind of busy," Claire gasped through a contraction. Her whole body tensed, curved around the pain. Jolene waited for the contraction to pass, then spoke rapidly. "Blake's law firm discovered his embezzlement months ago. March, specifically. They've been building a case against him since then, gathering evidence, documenting everything. Then Blake started his affair with Amber in April. She had access to files as his paralegal. He seduced her specifically to steal documents, destroy evidence, cover his tracks. Amber didn't know. She thought the relationship was real. She thought he loved her." Claire processed this through another contraction. The pain was getting worse, faster. "So she was a victim, too." "Yes, and when she found out 3 days ago that he'd been using her, she went to the district attorney, turned over everything, emails Blake sent her, instructions on what files to delete, evidence of obstruction of justice." Jolene smiled grimly. "The DA is filing charges today. Embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, witness tampering. Blake's going to prison. Claire, real prison. 4 years minimum, maybe more." Another contraction. Stronger. Claire gripped the bed rails, wrote it out. "How long?" 4 years minimum if he pleads guilty. 6 to 8 if he goes to trial and loses. The DA isn't offering good deals. This is too public, too egregious." Jolene squeezed Claire's hand. "You won, not the way you wanted, not through the civil system, but you won." The labor progressed fast after that. 6 centimeters at 4 a.m., 8 centimeters at 6 a.m. The pain was enormous, all-consuming, unlike anything Claire had experienced. But she focused on one thing, her daughter, Paige, almost here, almost safe. The doctor came in at 7 a.m. Dr. Sarah Chen, calm and professional. "You're doing great, Claire. Baby's heartbeat is strong. You're almost ready to push." At 7:30, Blake showed up at the hospital. Security stopped him at the elevator on the 4th floor. He was drunk, stumbling, screaming about his rights, his baby, his wife. His voice echoed through the maternity ward, disturbing other laboring mothers, frightening families. Claire heard it all from her delivery room, heard him shouting her name, heard him demanding to be let in. She felt nothing but relief when police arrived. They arrested Blake on the spot for violating the restraining order, public intoxication, disorderly conduct. He fought them, actually fought, throwing punches at officers who were just doing their jobs. They had to physically restrain him, cuff him, drag him to the elevator while he screamed obscenities. Claire listened to her husband being arrested and felt the last emotional connection snap. Whatever she'd felt for Blake, love, hurt, anger, it was gone now. He was just a problem being solved, a threat being neutralized. At 8:43 p.m., after 13 hours of labor, Paige Donovan entered the world. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, dark hair like Claire's mother, blue eyes that would probably change but looked exactly like Reese's right now. Perfect fingers, perfect toes, healthy lungs that announced her arrival with an angry, lusty cry. Claire held her daughter and wept. Not from pain, not from exhaustion, from victory. Complicated, messy, imperfect victory that came with pains and scars and trauma that would take years to heal. But victory nonetheless. Reese arrived an hour later, bail finally posted. Dutch had picked him up from county jail, driven him straight to the hospital. He still wore the same clothes from 3 days ago, looked exhausted, smelled like jail, that particular combination of industrial cleaner and despair. He stood in the doorway of Claire's hospital room, leather vest and all, looking at his sister holding his niece. Tears streamed down his face. This huge, intimidating man who ran a motorcycle club and had just spent 72 hours in jail, crying openly at the sight of a 7-pound baby. "She's beautiful. Claire, come meet your goddaughter." Reese approached slowly, like the baby might break, or like he might, from the weight of everything that had happened to get them here. Claire placed Paige in his massive, tattooed arms. The biker cradled the infant with surprising gentleness, natural instinct taking over. "I'm sorry I wasn't here for the birth," Reese said, voice thick. "You were here when it mattered." Claire leaned back against the pillows, exhausted but at peace. "You protected us, both of us, every single day. You did what you had to do." "The charges will be dropped," Reese said, still gazing at Paige. "My lawyer's confident, no evidence, no witnesses to the actual conversation. Blake won't testify against me. He's got bigger problems now. It'll be fine." "I know." Claire watched her brother hold her daughter, two of the most important people in her life, her past and her future, connected in this moment. The next morning, police arrested Blake at county jail where he'd spent the night after his hospital incident. The new charges were red embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice, witness, tampering. The district attorney had everything: documents, testimony from Amber, testimony from Blake's firm partners, Claire's forensic evidence, electronic communications. Blake's lawyer tried to negotiate, tried to argue extenuating circumstances, tried to paint Blake as a man who'd made mistakes but deserved leniency. The DA wasn't interested. This case had made the news. A successful lawyer betraying his pregnant wife, stealing from clients, corrupting his paralegal to destroy evidence. It was too public, too scandalous. The DA needed a win, needed to show that rich lawyers weren't above the law. Blake was offered one deal: plead guilty to all charges, get 4 years minimum security, or go to trial and risk 8 years in regular prison. He took the deal. Jolene visited Claire in the hospital with news late that afternoon. Blake's mother tried to pull strings, Jolene said. Sitting in the chair beside Claire's bed, Paige slept in a bassinet nearby. tiny chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Called in every favor, contacted judges, prosecutors, anyone with power. But this is too big, too much evidence, and even Harley can't buy her son out of this one. What about custody? Claire asked. Nursing Paige. The baby latched easily. Another small miracle in a week of complications. Blake signed away all parental rights this morning. Voluntary termination. Part of his plea deal, the DA required it. Jolene smiled. It was the first genuine, unguarded smile Claire had seen from her in weeks. Paige is yours. Completely. Legally. Forever. Blake has no claim, no visitation rights, no custody, nothing. He gave it all up to reduce his sentence. Claire looked down at her daughter. Safe. Protected. Hers. What's the sentence? 4 years in minimum security federal prison, then 5 years probation. He's required to pay child support based on his earnings. But given that he'll be disbarred and have a felony record, that won't amount to much. Probably minimum wage calculations. Jolene paused. It's over. Claire, you won. But it didn't feel like winning. It felt like surviving. And Claire was learning there was a significant difference between the two. Outside the hospital window, the sun set over Phoenix, orange and pink streaking across the desert sky, beautiful and indifferent to human drama. Claire held her daughter and felt the weight of everything that had happened. The betrayal, the fight, the Kian. Reese risking jail time, her career impacted, her trust shattered, her marriage destroyed. But Paige was here, safe, healthy, loved, and some days that had to be enough. Claire took Paige home to a new apartment 3 days later. Not the clubhouse. Somewhere quiet, safe, her own space. The reality of single motherhood hit immediately. Sleepless nights, constant feedings, diapers, crying. The overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive. And the trauma. Every time Claire closed her eyes, she saw Blake's face in the hotel hallway, Amber's laugh, the parking garage fall, the courtroom betrayals. She had PTSD. She knew it, recognized the symptoms from cases she'd worked. Hypervigilance, nightmares, panic attacks when she heard loud voices, but she couldn't afford therapy. Blake's assets were frozen in legal proceedings. The small settlement she'd received barely covered rent and basics. She was living paycheck to paycheck, trying to figure out when she could return to work. Reese visited daily, brought groceries, fixed things that broke, held Paige while Claire showered or slept. You don't have to do this alone, Reese said one evening, bouncing Paige gently. I kind of do, Claire replied. She was folding laundry mechanically, her eyes distant. This is my life now. Single mother, damaged, broke. You're not damaged. I am, Reese. Claire looked at him. I trusted Blake completely, believed in our marriage, and it was all fake. How do I ever trust anyone again? Reese didn't have an answer. 2 months after Paige's birth, Claire returned to work. Part-time, her mother watched Paige 3 days a week. It was enough to pay bills. Barely. Life fell into a rhythm. Wake up, feed baby. Work. Come home, feed baby. Sleep. Repeat. There was no joy in it. Just survival. Just getting through each day. One evening, Jolene stopped by with wine and takeout. You look like hell. Thanks, Claire said dryly, holding Paige. Appreciate the honesty. I'm serious. When's the last time you did something for yourself? Claire thought about it. Couldn't remember. I'm a single mother with a 2-month-old. There is no for myself anymore. That's not sustainable. Jolene took Paige, cooed at her. You need to heal. Claire, really heal. Not just survive. Claire's voice cracked. How do I heal from this? Therapy, time, letting people help you. Jolene looked at her seriously. You saved your daughter. You beat Blake. You won, but you're acting like you lost. The words hit hard, true and uncomfortable. That night, Claire looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. She'd lost weight. Dark circles under her eyes. Hair unwashed. She looked haunted. This wasn't who she wanted to be. Not for herself, not for Paige. The next morning, Claire called a therapist. So, 3 months later, Harper Hartley filed for grandparent visitation rights. The petition arrived via certified mail. Harper wanted supervised visits with Paige, claimed she had a right to know her granddaughter despite Blake's incarceration. Claire read the papers and felt the old fear return. Would this ever end? Would the Hartleys ever stop trying to control her life? Jolene filed a response immediately. She won't win. Blake terminated his rights. Harper has no legal standing. But she'll try. Claire held Paige close. She'll keep trying. Forever. Let her... Jolene's voice was hard. Every time she tries, she loses money on legal fees. Eventually, even Harper will get tired. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Claire prepared testimony, gathered evidence of Harper's previous harassment, documented everything. She was good at this. Building cases, following evidence, protecting what mattered. The hearing was mercifully quick. The judge reviewed Harper's petition, reviewed Claire's response, made a decision in under an hour. Grandparents' visitation rights typically require an existing relationship and demonstrated need. The judge said, Mrs. Hartley has no relationship with this child. The father voluntarily terminated his rights. Petition denied. Harper stood, face red. This is absurd. That's my granddaughter. And you raised the man who betrayed her mother. The judge replied coldly, perhaps focus on understanding where you went wrong rather than demanding access to another generation. Petition denied. Outside the courtroom, Harper approached Claire one last time. This isn't over, Harper hissed. Yes, it is, Claire said calmly. She held Paige, who was sleeping peacefully. You lost. Blake lost. And we're moving on. I suggest you do the same. She walked away, head high, felt stronger than she had in months. Maybe Jolene was right. Maybe she had won. She just needed to believe it. 6 months after Paige's birth, Claire's life had stabilized. Not perfect, but better. She worked full-time again, had a good therapist, was learning to trust herself. One evening, Jolene called with surprising news. Amber Sinclair sent you a letter. It came to my office. Claire's chest tightened. What does it say? She's asking permission to meet with you, says she has things to explain. Jolene paused. You don't have to respond. But Claire was curious. Against her better judgment, she agreed. They met at a coffee shop, neutral ground. Amber looked different, older, sadder. No expensive clothes, just jeans and a sweater. Thank you for coming, Amber said quietly. Claire didn't respond, just waited. I was 26 and stupid, Amber began. Blake was older, successful, charming. He told me you two were separated, that the pregnancy was a last-ditch attempt to save a dead marriage. I believed him. Why should I care? Claire's voice was cold. You shouldn't. Amber looked down at her coffee. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that he lied to both of us, used both of us. And I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. Sorry I hurt you. Claire studied her, saw genuine remorse, genuine shame. It didn't erase what Amber had done, but it complicated the narrative. He hit you, Claire said. After I caught you, he hit you when you told him about the fake pregnancy. Amber's hand went to her cheek reflexively. Yeah. Did you report it? No, I was too embarrassed. Amber met Claire's eyes. But I testified against him. For the embezzlement, I gave prosecutors everything. It's not enough. I know it's not, but it's something. They sat in silence. Two women damaged by the same man. Not friends, probably never friends, but no longer enemies. I hope you're okay, Amber said finally. You and your daughter. We're surviving, Claire replied. Then, softer. I forgive you. Not for you, for me. I can't carry that anger anymore. Amber nodded, tears in her eyes. Thank you. After Amber left, Claire sat alone with her coffee. Forgiveness felt strange, uncomfortable, but also lighter, like putting down something heavy she'd been carrying too long. 8 months after Paige's birth, something unexpected happened. Claire met someone. His name was Daniel Ross, 37. high school history teacher, divorced, 2 kids of his own, kind eyes, patient smile. He asked her out at a parent-teacher mixer Reese had dragged her to. Claire almost said no. She wasn't ready, didn't trust herself, didn't trust anyone. But something made her say yes. Their first date was coffee. Simple, easy. Daniel talked about his kids, his teaching, his terrible divorce 5 years ago. Claire found herself relaxing, laughing even. "I'm not looking for anything serious," Claire said honestly. "I'm still healing. I have a baby. I'm broke. I'm damaged. I'm looking for coffee and conversation," Daniel replied. "Everything else can figure itself out later." They went on more dates. Slowly, carefully. Daniel met Paige, was gentle and patient with her. Met Reese, who grilled him like a suspect. Daniel handled it with humor. 3 months into dating, Daniel told Claire he loved her. She panicked, pulled away. Couldn't say it back. "That's okay," Daniel said. "I'm not Blake. I'm not going anywhere. Take your time." And he meant it. He stayed, patient, steady, real. 1 year after Paige's birth, Claire stood in a courtroom for the final time. Blake's sentencing hearing. She didn't have to attend, but she wanted to, needed to see it end. Blake looked different. Prison orange jumpsuit, thinner, older. His hair had gone gray at the temples. He didn't look like the charming lawyer anymore. He looked like a man who'd lost everything. The judge reviewed the case. "Mr. Harley, you've been convicted of embezzlement, fraud, and obstruction of justice. You betrayed your clients, your firm, your wife, and your unborn child. You've shown minimal remorse and attempted to manipulate these proceedings at every turn." Blake's lawyer tried to interject. The judge held up a hand. "I'm sentencing you to 4 years in minimum security prison, followed by 5 years probation. You're required to pay full restitution to your victims and child support for your daughter. You voluntarily terminated parental rights. When you're released, you may petition to restore those rights, but given your conduct, I strongly doubt any judge will grant it." Blake stood, looked directly at Claire. "I'm sorry," he said, voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." Claire looked back at him, felt nothing, no anger, no satisfaction, just emptiness where he used to matter. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "Not because you deserve it, because I deserve peace." Well, she walked out of the courthouse. Reese waited outside with Paige in his arms. Daniel stood beside them. "How do you feel?" Reese asked. "Free," Claire said. She took Paige, held her daughter close. Finally free. 2 years later, Claire Donovan stood in a small apartment living room, watching Paige take wobbly steps toward her. 2 years old, talking in sentences, fearless and curious and perfect. Life wasn't easy. Money was still tight. Blake paid child support from prison, but it wasn't much. Claire worked long hours, juggled single parenthood with therapy and rebuilding. But she was happy, actually happy. Daniel had proposed 6 months ago. Claire said yes. Not because she needed him, but because she chose him. The difference mattered. They were planning a small wedding. Reese would walk her down the aisle. Paige would be flower girl. The Iron Ravens would provide security because that's what family did. Harper Hartley had tried one more custody petition last month. The judge didn't even grant a hearing, just dismissed it outright. Blake would be released in 2 years. Claire didn't think about it much. He was irrelevant to her life now. Paige would never remember him. Would grow up with Reese as her father figure, Daniel as her stepdad. That was enough. One evening, Claire updated the journal she'd been keeping for Paige, writing down the story, the truth. So one day, when Paige asked about her father, Claire could show her everything. "Dear Paige, you're 2 years old today. You love trucks, hate vegetables, and sing constantly. You're fearless, just like your grandmother. Your biological father made terrible choices. He hurt me. He hurt others. But he gave me you. And for that, I'll always be grateful. I want you to know something important. You are not defined by his mistakes. You are not your father's daughter. You're mine. You're Reese's. You're part of a family that chose you, fought for you, protected you. I thought winning meant defeating him completely. having the perfect revenge. But real winning was quieter than that. It was survival. It was healing. It was choosing to be happy despite everything. Some days are still hard. I still have nightmares, still struggle with trust, but I'm fighting. Every day, I'm fighting to be better. You made me strong, Paige. Before you, I thought I was weak, thought I needed someone to complete me. But carrying you, protecting you, raising you alone, taught me something crucial. I was always enough, just as I was. I hope you learned that sooner than I did. Love always. Mom. Claire closed the journal. Paige toddled over, grabbed her leg, said, Mama. Yeah, baby girl, I'm your mama. Outside, motorcycles rumbled. The Iron Ravens, her brother's club, her chosen family, coming over for Sunday dinner like they did every week. Daniel arrived with flowers, kissed Claire softly. How was your day? Good, Claire said, and meant it. Really good. That night, sitting around a table crowded with bikers and family and love, Claire looked at her life and felt something she'd stopped believing in. Hope. Not the naive hope of a young bride, not the desperate hope of a betrayed wife, but the hard-won hope of a survivor. The kind of hope that knew darkness intimately and chose light anyway. She'd lost her marriage, lost her trust, lost her innocence, but she'd gained something more valuable. She'd gained herself, and in the end, that was the only victory that mattered.